They thought the games were entertainment. They never knew they were watching a ritual. Let me tell you what they never told you about the Roman arenas. What you saw in paintings and films, the cheers, the sand, the blood, is only a fraction of the truth. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the shine of armor, the Colosseum was not just a place of spectacle. It was a temple, a living altar built not for gods of mercy, but for gods that fed on fear, pain, and death itself. When I first began researching the gladiators, I expected heroism, men fighting for glory, survival, or freedom. But what I found hidden in the fragments of old scrolls and temple graffiti was something much darker. There are rituals historians politely ignore, inscriptions that don't fit the image of Rome as civilized. Beneath the grandeur of empire, there was something ancient and almost supernatural, something the Romans themselves tried to erase from record. They called it the Pact of the Sand. No historian will teach you that name, because it appears only in fragments, scratched into amphorae, whispered in letters written by soldiers stationed near the Colosseum. But every mention shares a single chilling detail. The blood of the gladiator was sacred. It wasn't just spilled, it was offered. To understand why, you have to understand Rome's obsession with control. The empire could conquer nations, break kings, and enslave thousands, but death was the one thing it could not rule. So they turned death into ritual. They trained men to face it, to perform it, to turn the most terrifying thing in existence into an art form that pleased both crowd and gods. Every time a gladiator stepped into the arena, his life ceased to belong to him. His blood was bound by an oath known as the Sacramentum Sanguinis, the blood oath. Some scholars think it was merely symbolic, but ancient writings from the Temple of Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, tell another story. They speak of midnight ceremonies before great battles, where gladiators stood barefoot on the cold sand, cutting their palms, letting blood drip into a bronze bowl. The officiant, a priest or sometimes a former champion, would whisper the vow. Through blood we bind ourselves to the arena. Through pain we awaken the gods that rule it. The men believed that their spilled blood didn't die with them. It lived within the sand, absorbed by the earth, absorbed by Rome itself. There's a chilling consistency across multiple sites, Pompeii, Capua, even small provincial amphitheaters in Gaul and Hispania. Archaeologists have found pits beneath the fighting grounds containing not just bones, but talismans, animal hearts, even burnt offerings sealed in clay jars. None of this fits the standard idea of Roman entertainment. These are ritual offerings, evidence of something far older, something that may have begun before Rome was even founded. The sand beneath those arenas was not ordinary soil. It was collected from sacred grounds, volcanic ash, crushed limestone, sometimes mixed with blood from previous games. Ancient texts call it Harena Mala, the cursed sand. It was said to hold the echoes of every death that occurred upon it. You might think this is exaggeration, but in the letters of Pliny the Younger, there's an obscure passage often overlooked. He writes of a strange heaviness that hung in the amphitheater even when empty, as though unseen eyes watched from the very earth. Some later scholars dismissed it as metaphor, but others saw it differently. Perhaps Pliny was describing the weight of something real, something residual, like the lingering presence of those who died there. The Roman belief system thrived on the exchange between life and death. They believed power could be taken, transferred, inherited through the act of killing. In some gladiator schools, when a fighter fell, his fellow trainees would smear his blood across their chest before the corpse was removed. The gesture was not grief, it was initiation. They thought a fallen warrior's strength could pass to the living through contact. You won't find that in official Roman accounts. But graffiti carved into the walls of a ludus, a gladiator barracks, still remains. One inscription reads, "I wear the blood of my brother, so I may not die." Another, "His heart beats in mine." When you connect these fragments, a darker picture emerges. The games weren't random bouts of violence. They were carefully choreographed rituals, built to channel the fear, the blood, and the energy of dying men into something almost sacred, and perhaps something hungry. As I dug deeper, I began to notice a pattern. Certain arenas were considered unlucky. Champions who fought there would fall mysteriously ill. Others would refuse to enter the ring at all, claiming they heard voices from beneath the sand at night. One account from a Roman physician named Gallienus mentions that after a large-scale battle, several surviving gladiators complained of whispers in the dark and visions of faces in the dust. These stories were written off as superstition, stress, trauma, exhaustion. But then I found a pattern the historians didn't. The same arenas that produced the most legends of hauntings were also the ones closest to ancient necropolises, burial grounds predating the empire by centuries. The Colosseum itself was built near an older site of human sacrifice from the early kings of Rome. It was as if every new monument was laid directly atop the bones of old gods, feeding on what came before. By the time of Emperor Domitian, the games had become grotesque in scale. Executions, mass slaughter, animals tearing prisoners apart. But among all this horror, one ritual persisted quietly behind the scenes. The Consecratio Arenae, the consecration of the arena. Before each major festival, a small group of priests and former gladiators would enter at night to bless the ground. They poured oil, wine, and blood from a slaughtered ram into the sand. A protective rite, they said. But protective from what? The Romans didn't do anything without reason. If they were blessing the ground before a game, then they feared something within it. If stories like this make you question what we think we know about history, stay with me. Because what happened beneath Rome's arenas wasn't sport. It was a pact. A deal written not in ink or marble, but in blood. And the next part of this story reveals just how deep that blood oath truly went. Subscribe to Tortured Past, because the truth we're uncovering next is one even Rome tried to bury forever. After years of research, I began tracing references to a hidden order that existed among the gladiators themselves. They called it the Circle of the Veil. No senator ever mentioned it, and no Roman historian dared write of it. But in letters confiscated after a slave revolt in Capua, one phrase appears again and again. We keep the vow in the dust. The vow, it seems, was more than loyalty to their masters. It was a spiritual bond, sworn before entering the arena for the first time. A gladiator's blood oath wasn't simply a promise to fight. It was an offering of the self, body, spirit, and destiny to the force that ruled the sand. There's an account from a Roman scribe named Marcus Terentius, who was assigned to record victories for the governor of Campania. In his surviving notes, there was one line that scholars often skip over. They bled not only for the people, but for the ones unseen. He never explains who those unseen were, but he writes of torches burning blue in the tunnels beneath the amphitheater and the air thick with the scent of iron and myrrh. That combination, blood and myrrh, appears in other records of death rites across the empire. Coincidence? Maybe. But repetition tells its own story. The circle believed the gods of Rome demanded more than sacrifice. They demanded memory. Every drop of blood shed had to be witnessed, recorded, and honored through ritual. When a gladiator fell, his body was never left untouched. There were keepers of the oath, attendants who gathered a portion of the blood-soaked sand and sealed it inside urns. Those urns were buried beneath the cells, forming what archaeologists later mistook for drainage pits. But the more I read, the clearer it became. They were tombs, not tombs for men, tombs for energy. One fragment of a prayer carved into marble and now kept in Naples reads, "May their strength feed the dust. May the dust rise when called. Rise when called." The phrase suggests invocation, a summoning. It means someone expected the arena to respond. What if that's why the sand was sacred? It wasn't just a surface to fight on. It was a vessel. Every scream, every drop of blood, every dying breath sank into it, and they believed it could hold that power. Over time, the arenas became massive batteries of pain, charging themselves with centuries of death. In the records of Emperor Commodus, the self-proclaimed god who fought as a gladiator himself, there is mention of whispers from the sand. He claimed he could hear the voices of warriors calling his name before each fight. Everyone dismissed it as madness, another sign of his vanity. But what if it wasn't madness? What if he was simply the only one arrogant enough to listen? A set of bronze amulets found in the ruins of the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator school, bears inscriptions that translate to, "He who falls in sight of Nemesis shall never leave her gaze." Nemesis, goddess of divine retribution, was often invoked in the arenas. But these amulets seem less like protection and more like binding spells, designed to keep souls tethered to the place of their death. Imagine hundreds of spirits trapped beneath the ground, chained to the soil that drank their blood. Some ancient observers sensed the horror behind the pageantry. A poet named Juvenal once wrote, "We cheer while the gods feast." Historians cite it as satire, but it reads differently now, doesn't it? I once thought the curse of the arenas was superstition, until I read about what happened in Capua in 79 AD, the same year Vesuvius erupted. Survivors spoke of an earthquake shaking the amphitheater during a festival. The ground split open, and a black vapor rose from the sand. Dozens collapsed from choking fumes before the eruption even reached the city. Priests called it an omen. Later, when they rebuilt, they performed the old rites again, blood, oil, and salt poured into the ground to seal the mouth of the earth. Some said the eruption was divine punishment for the blood spilled at those games. But I can't shake the thought that maybe the arena itself, fed by centuries of suffering, had finally awoken. By the 3rd century, the rituals had grown even more secretive. Gladiators were being drawn from conquered peoples with their own pagan traditions, Dacians, Thracians, Syrians, each bringing new layers of belief to Rome's existing ones. Somewhere in that fusion, the blood oath evolved. Fighters began etching sigils into their weapons, patterns that don't match any known Roman symbols. Some look Celtic, others look almost Sumerian. What if they weren't worshipping Roman gods at all anymore? What if the rituals had turned to something older, something the Romans themselves feared but couldn't control? One report from a Christian chronicler named Lucius, written decades after the fall of the Colosseum's last games, describes a disturbing rumor. They say the sand remembers, that even after the games ceased, the ground bled when it rained. It sounds poetic, but several excavations in the early modern era did uncover patches of deep, rust-colored soil beneath the Colosseum, too dark to be mere iron deposits. No one can say for sure what it is. But local legends persist that under certain storms, the ground weeps red. It's strange, isn't it? Even today, the air inside the Colosseum feels heavy. Visitors speak of sudden chills, shadows that move against the light, whispers in empty corridors. Science calls it suggestion. History calls it trauma. But maybe, just maybe, it's memory. Rome was built on ritual. But the arenas were built on fear. They turned the act of dying into worship, and in doing so, they may have created something that never truly died. The final connection came to me when studying records from the underground chambers, where animals and men were kept before being raised to the stage. Those tunnels weren't just storage. They were lined with frescoes, long since faded, depicting winged figures and serpents coiling around bleeding men. Hidden among them, archaeologists found a mosaic showing a man kneeling before a figure made entirely of shadow, with one Latin word beneath, pactum, the pact. Every empire is built on a bargain, with power, with fate, with something unseen. And I've begun to wonder if Rome as bargain wasn't with the gods of Olympus at all. but with the darker forces that dwell beneath the surface of every empire's glory. The games were not mere shows. They were the empire's heartbeat, and the arenas were its heart chambers, pulsing, bleeding, breathing. When the last games ended in the 5th century, Rome fell not long after. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps the ritual that fed the empire finally starved. But the story doesn't end there. Because buried deep beneath those ruins lies one final secret, one discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about the gladiators, their oaths, and the curse that still clings to the soil of Rome. When I first stood beneath the Colosseum, deep in the hypogum where the light barely reaches, I felt it. The same heaviness Pliny described 2,000 years ago. The air doesn't move down there. It presses against you, as if something unseen is watching, waiting. Most people see ruins. I saw a wound that never healed. I'd come across an unpublished excavation report from 1894, written by an Italian archaeologist named Cesare Valli. It was filed away quietly in the Vatican archives, never translated, never cited. In it, Valli describes finding a sealed stone chamber beneath the lowest level of the Colosseum, something no one had ever mentioned before. He called it the Vault of Oaths. According to his notes, the chamber was discovered by accident during restoration work. It was small, circular, and lined with iron rings fixed into the walls. In the center stood a black marble basin, cracked but intact. Inside it lay a layer of hardened residue, dark, metallic, almost like dried blood. Valli wrote that carved into the basin's rim were faint Latin words, sanguis donatus, vita servata, blood given, life preserved. He described the sensation of standing there, how the temperature dropped, how his torchlight dimmed though no draft could be felt. One of his assistants fainted. Another swore he heard chanting. Valli left the site that same night. Within a week, he resigned from his post and never published his findings. The chamber was sealed again, and the records buried in archives no one reads. But the most disturbing detail came at the end of his report. He noted that when they first broke through the stone wall, they found the ground inside damp, though no water seeped from above. When they touched it, it was sticky, metallic, as if the earth itself was bleeding. No one ever reopened that vault. Officially, it doesn't exist. Yet if you visit the Colosseum today, there's one section still blocked to the public near the Western Arch. Workers claim their tools rust faster there. Some refuse to enter altogether, saying they hear breathing when the lights are turned off. Now here's where history turns cold. When I compared the symbols on the amulets found in the gladiator schools with sketches from Valli's notes, they matched perfectly. The same sigil, a serpent coiled around a sword, swallowing its own tail. The same symbol appears on fragments of armor found in Capua and Pompeii. It wasn't a decoration. It was a seal. The blood oath wasn't just metaphor. It was a pact of preservation. Gladiators didn't only fight for honor, they fought to sustain the spirit of Rome itself, and each death, each sacrifice, renewed that pact. Think about it. The empire's rise coincided with the height of the games. As long as the blood flowed, Rome thrived. When the games stopped, the empire crumbled. It's as though the city's vitality depended not on politics or trade, but on ritual death. Some say that when Constantine outlawed the games, he broke a divine chain that had kept Rome's power alive. The gods of death were no longer fed. The pact went silent. But silent doesn't mean broken. The question that haunted me, and still does, is, what happens to a ritual when it's forgotten? Does it fade away? Or does it keep waiting, deep beneath the ground, hungry to be remembered? In 2017, a small team of conservationists working under the Colosseum uncovered bones, human, but not where they should have been. The remains were found inside the foundations, mixed into the mortar itself. Preliminary analysis revealed cuts on the bones, ritual markings. The report was quickly dismissed as construction fill, a tidy academic phrase for something no one wanted to explain. But to those who've studied the Sacramentum Sanguinis, it sounds exactly like what it always was, an offering. And here's the detail that chills me most. The blood oath wasn't one way. The inscription "Valley found, blood given, life preserved," implies reciprocity. The gladiators gave blood, and in return something preserved them. Every generation since has claimed to hear echoes in the Colosseum. Not ghosts in the usual sense, but energy, repetition, memory replaying itself, refusing to fade. Rome may have fallen, but the pact might still be intact. Some modern historians speculate that the Colosseum's design, its perfect symmetry, its underground channels, its drainage system, wasn't just engineering brilliance. It may have been intentional geometry, a sacred pattern meant to focus and trap energy. The entire arena was, in effect, an enormous ritual device. Every death added power to the structure itself. When I walk those corridors, I sometimes wonder how many of those souls still linger. How many still feel their blood bound to the dust, unable to leave the circle they swore to. You see, the Romans believed the worst fate wasn't death. It was being forgotten. And the oath ensured they never would be. Their names may be lost, their bones scattered, but their essence was promised eternal remembrance through the arena. That's the real horror. Not the brutality, not the screams, not even the deaths, but the possibility that the ritual worked, that the sand remembers, that the pact still breathes. Because if that's true, every tourist, every historian, every filmmaker who steps onto that ground isn't just visiting history, they're disturbing it, and maybe, just maybe, feeding it. The Colosseum's sand may look dry, but legends say that when the night rain falls, a red tint seeps to the surface. Locals call it lacrimae arenarum, the tears of the sand. They think it's iron oxide. But those who've seen it up close swear it smells faintly of rust and salt, like blood. I can't prove any of this. History resists proof when it comes to what it wants buried. But I can tell you this. Rome's arenas were never about sport. They were about survival, of something older, darker, and still waiting beneath the stones. Every civilization believes it's different. Every empire thinks it can master death. Rome tried. It built monuments of blood, carved oaths into stone, and made the earth itself a witness. But the dead never forget their bargains. So the next time you see the Colosseum at sunset, its arches glowing red in the dying light, remember this. You were not looking at a ruin. You're looking at a reminder, a mouth that once fed on human sacrifice and might not be finished yet. The empire may have fallen, but its ritual heart still beats in silence. And the sand beneath Rome still remembers the sound of dying men whispering their oaths to gods that were never merciful. If you've made it this far, you've felt it too. The weight of what history tried to hide. There are stories buried deeper than bones, rituals still echoing through time. If you want to keep uncovering the truths that empires erased, subscribe to Tortured Past. Because what we reveal next will make even Rome's darkest secrets seem merciful.